What's up, Internet? This is Zach, and this video I'm going to be talking about something that's a little controversial, especially now that all of the higher spells and whatnot have been completely changed. Because a lot of these spells from like here and up were nerfed, buffed, whatever. There were a lot of spell changes made. But I still want to end up pointing out the school list because while a lot of people have different opinions and all of that, and I'll give my opinion on each school at the end of this video, but I just want to give a clean slate to each of these schools for the way they are set up and how each of them were affected in this, that, the other thing. And then I'll give an opinion on which one I would recommend for starting off if you actually don't have a very much experience with the game. At which point I'll mention which school I personally prefer. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll just go around the circle here. Storm. For all you're actually gonna really know about me will actually be Storm, because even though I'm currently on my death, yes, I know I don't have full Darkmark gear, whatever, give me a break. So all you'll actually have known me having is Storm. I will give Storm this, considering if you've actually watched anything of my walkthrough, you'll know it fizzles a lot. I blame my luck, and personally my luck is actually pretty bad, but that's just the way Storm is. It's only 70% accuracy. So overall it's just accuracy is really, really bad. But I'll give Storm this. It does have the highest flat damage. So everything on here, as far as the attacks go, are stronger than any other school as far as flat damage. Now there's a reason I'm emphasizing flat damage, and I'll get to that later. But if you want to do a really strong, hard hit, Storm would be your pick. Because despite the fact that 90% of the time you're going to fizzle, there is gear that you can get that can give you enough accuracy to be 100% accurate. Which means you're not going to fizzle if you end up with that gear. Now obviously you can't start off with that, but by the time you reach Malice Stare, it's possible. Granted, at that point it's still unlikely, it's more likely around levels 80 to 100, but it's possible. So the lack of accuracy really can be made up, and once that happens, Storm gets incredible damage and crit on their gear. So you're going to be doing insane damage. Biggest drawbacks, of course, are accuracy. Ice. Oh yeah, something I forgot to mention on Storm as well is its health is usually super low. Now Ice. Well, let's just... Oh, yeah. There is this. I actually have trained Ice to Tower Shield on this wizard, just because that's a typical good spell to train up to. But, just looking at Ice Wyvern, that is weak for 4 pips. And Colossus, that's weak. Uh, so right off the bat, you can see Ice's drawback. It's stupid weak. However, I have seen ice hitters. They do exist. Which does prove that it is possible to get a lot of damage, because I've seen ice wizards with 120, 130 damage. That's pretty high, considering in comparison, at almost level 120, even my death still only has 82, and a lot of that's from my pet. So, the fact that that's possible is saying something. So, the lack of damage can be overcome. And 80% accurate, nowhere near the best, but it's something. Now, positives for ice is usually they have a super high critical block and resist, and oftentimes if you're questing with an ice wizard, the health of the ice wizard is going to be super high. So if you're naturally someone who you would be able to want to take a hit but don't really care too much about damage, ice would be your pick, considering it's got the best, really the best overall defense. In fact, it's one of the only 2 schools that can actually become completely immune to damage with 101 resist, just based off of gear. And then the health is also super high. Next up, we've got fire. Now, what was it I said about storm? Oh yeah, flat damage. So, fire is actually the strongest school as far as damage goes. 75% accurate, so only slightly better than storm as far as accuracy. And looking at Fire Cat and Elephant, it doesn't look directly like it's actually stronger than storm, but that's because flat damage isn't its combo. In fact, you can't really get any here, but a lot of what fire gets is overtimes. That, if you actually go through the entire overtime, can in some cases do up to twice the amount of damage that storm does overall. Now, with this said, if you want to do a ton of damage and don't have patience, don't do fire, because fire, while everything else is the second highest, its health is also the second lowest, and its critical block is the second lowest, resist second lowest. It's really bad in all of those, only barely better than storm. Critical isn't nearly as good as storm, but it is still possible to get 100% crit. You have to sacrifice a lot of stuff for it, but it's possible. And the accuracy problem, again, can be overcome just like the storm. Really, the biggest reason you would actually choose fire over storm, however, would be since storm naturally does more on flat damage, the only real reason you'd choose fire over that if you're looking for damage is if you have patience and know how to survive a hit even with low health. Otherwise, fire's probably not the best. Now, to remove opinion from that, I will say Usually it does do more first than a lot of overtimes. Like Ice has an overtime called Frostbite that does like 100 in the first round and then like 500 over 3 rounds after that. Versus Fire, with Fire Elf, starts off with 100 for 210 overtime that you get at a lower level. So, I mean, even looking at it compared to Firecat, it starts off doing more damage than Firecat in the first hit, unless, considering Firecat, and I've actually tested it several times, Firecat usually does less than 100. Usually. Fire Elf is guaranteed 100 on the first turn. So, really, biggest reason you'd choose Fire is if you know how to survive a hit and want the most damage possible. Next up, Death. Hello, Malorn. Where's the Death School? In Nightside. So, anyone who actually knows the lore of the first arc knows exactly what happened to the Death School. In fact, anyone who's just played through Wizard City knows exactly what happened to the Death School. And that it was ripped out of Ravenwood. But we're not over here to talk about that. We're over here to talk about the way it rolls. Now, just looking over here, I'm wearing tier 2 Darkmoor gear, which puts me at 5,500 health at almost level 120. Now, that's not bad. In fact, that's like top 3 in defense. Not great, but not bad. My resistance, with the exception of if it's pierced, instantly cuts 25% off of any attack that hits me overall. And that's, again, with tier 2 Darkmoor armor, not even tier 1. I already have enough accuracy to overcome this, because this puts me at 101% accurate. Now, Call of Karulu, and I think, yeah, all of the Shadow Pip hits, I still have a 4% chance to fizzle, but, I mean, you can't get it all right with barely being 100%, so fair is fair. I still cast like 96% of the time. Now, Death's biggest thing is that it uses a lot of drains. And I mean a lot. Because there's the first one, and then second one, oh hey, drain. There's the third one, and then the fourth one, oh hey, drain. And then there's poison, I don't really count that. Fourth one and the sixth one, oh hey, drain. Seventh one is the hit all, and oh hey, it's another drain. And then you get to the Skeletal Dragon, which is the 8th one, and the 9th one, oh hey, another drain. So, there's a very clear pattern of drains. It's almost, if not exactly, half of the spells that hit a death gets are drains. And it's only Death that does that. No other school has drains. Fire has Link and Power Link, which is a hit the enemy and heal you, but the heal and the hit have nothing to do with each other. And even then, it's a weak heal. Here, the harder you hit, the more it heals you. Now, naturally, Death's damage is a little bit lower because of that. Like a this with even ice, well, I think ice is still lower damage. Ice's second hit is still, yeah, it's actually even ice's second hit is stronger than ghoul. So it does have the drawback of being super weak, but as I pointed out earlier, 82 damage. That's not bad. Not to mention, I haven't, well, that's actually not all that great, but I'm also not set up for critical. But it's very easy to get this up to like 80-90% crit. This isn't great, but then I also have 16 armor piercing. So, looking at death overall, it's got some pretty good upsides. Drawbacks, of course, drop into the fact that even this, well, yes, like I said, this is actually pretty good. It could be better. And the accuracy, again, I'm barely 100% accurate at level 120. So, death really could use some increases there. Now, recently, death did get the bonus of drains being able to have a full enchant. So, if I put that onto a Call of Cthulhu or a Scarecrow, Call of Cthulhu will now do 975, and Scarecrow will then do 890, instead of only adding 2/3 to it, like it used to. Because the way that King's Owl threw it on there was, it would throw on 2/3 of the enchant, and then the last third would be put into heal. They recently changed to that so that it puts the full enchant on, which was nice. Myth. What to say about Myth? Aside from the fact that Cyrus is antsy. Someone's car alarm's going off. So, it's got the Tartarus quest. I still haven't done Tartarus on this wizard because I never found a reason to. Yeah, that's what I thought. And he's not gonna let me just decline that, so I'm just gonna real quickly. So I can't see the spell cards right now. But Cyrus, he's not the nicest professor, but that can't exactly count directly against Myth. What counts against Myth is that now, this doesn't apply anymore, but it used to be that Myth was super weak, like almost as weak as Ice, with its only positive having been minions. That's now changed. They have, when they changed the spells, they did give Myth a break and give it a little bit better damage and whatnot. So it's a pretty decent school now. The changes to Mythic Colossus I'm not sure I like, which is the Shadow Pip spell that it has, but that is what it is. Well, Darkmoor Shadow Pip spell anyway. It's Myth's Darkmoor spell is Mythic Colossus. I'm not sure I like that change, but that is what it is. But changing Orthrus to a hit all instead of a double hit, some people liked it as a double hit, but a lot of people considered that a great change. Myth doesn't really get much as far as hit alls after Humunga Frog, until Mythic Colossus, which they nerfed an awful lot. So, Myth has some pretty good sides now. But its biggest thing is minions. Now, do the earlier minions do much? Not really. But would they be useful against bosses and stuff? Sure. Any extra damage you can get off is useful. Just maybe don't summon a minion when you have a whole bunch of traps on the boss, because you're gonna lose them. But Myth does get a lot of minions. Now, a lot of people don't use them, and that's fine. That's their choice. But if you're someone who knows you're going to have to quest alone, Myth is the one that's advertised. Whether or not it's actually the best for soloing, who knows? But overall, Myth really does get a lot of minions. Like, I don't know, 30% of the spells it gets are just minion after minion after minion. Truthfully, early game, you actually have very few spells to work with because of how many minions you get. So, Myth is basically just minions. Take that as you will. Next up, Life. Good old Melinda Wu. Now, there is a lore side to the life as well as the death. Like I said, if you know the lore, then you know that Death School was ripped out of Ravenwood and put into Nightside by Malistaire. But another part of lore is the fact that Malistaire's wife, Sylvia Drake, ended up becoming sick to an illness, and she died. She was the life school professor, and that's what drove Malistaire into a rage. Ironic for a life school professor to die due to being sick, but I mean, what you gonna do? So that's the lore side of life. Life has the overall highest accuracy in the game at 90%. You don't need a whole lot of accuracy to become 100% accurate. That's just the way it rolls. However, if you look at Life's spell list, I have all but 2 of the spells that Melinda Wu will straight up give, one of which being Sanctuary, which increases heals. That's the only one aside from Centaur that I'm missing. And note that there is still the 3 heals. Now, Pixie you don't actually get from Melinda Wu, so you can cross that one off. But still, Sprite and Satyr can be extremely useful. Sprite can be super useful in early game when you're fighting like Crocotopia bosses, just because they can do damage faster than you'd want at that level, and this is a great way to heal that off over time as they do the damage. And Satyr, well, I trained it as a death, so it can be useful. Life also has decent health. I'm not gonna say it's amazing, but it's better than most. Its resist I don't think is great, nor is its damage critical or critical block. And obviously Pierce isn't really much of a life thing, so I don't think it's great in Pierce either. So overall the stats aren't that great, but if you're someone who just doesn't really want to hit, you want to work in a team and just make sure others don't die, Life is a great choice. Especially with Rebirth down the road, which heals your entire team for more than 800, I think it's like 890 or something like that, and puts I think it's like 800 absorb on everyone. So Life is a really good choice if you just want to be a healer. Next up, Balance. Now, Balance doesn't actually have a school in Ravenwood. Your Balance professor in Ravenwood is this guy, Arthur Withersfield. Now, that's not a bad thing. What the heck? Wow, they actually did change that. I didn't even notice they did that. see my observance. This used to be a power play, which would increase power flip chance. Now it increases balance damage by 25%. Dang. That must have been extremely recent. Wow. Now, as you can tell, balance isn't exactly known for damage. I mean, you can tell that just from Scarab. That's super weak. But that's because balance gets a lot of blades. You can use the elemental blades, the spirit blades, balance blade, blade storm. There are some wands, I think, that are balance only that give a dragon blade. So balance does get quite a few blades, and similar to traps, while it doesn't get faint like death does, it gets hex, it gets elemental trap, and spirit trap. So balance is a primarily support, because if you were to stack a balance blade, a blade storm, a hex, a spirit blade, and a spirit trap up onto a death wizard who has used a death blade, possibly if you were to actually use it first round and have it, shoot, what's it called? Dark Pact, as well as you having used a feint, a death trap, and a curse. That's a lot of damage used on a death, used from a death. So balance is a primarily support. Balance also actually gets two heals. Both of them are heal over times, but they're not bad. They're actually really, really good. I use Revealing Hands quite often. It basically replaced Satyr on my balance, which you won't probably see very often at all. So balance does get quite a bit as far as support. Now it can be used for damage, but it's clearly not intended to. I only at one point managed to get my balance over 100%. I don't even know if I still do. Oh no, but still over 100% damage. But I only managed to do that because I kinda pushed it that way. I didn't use Darkmoor gear for as long as most people would, because I wanted damage. Darkmoor didn't give me as much as I wanted. My damage has since gone down quite a bit, but I at one point had like 150 damage on that thing. Now, I will say, balance also has okay accuracy. It's not the best. It's the same one as death. But balance is the other school they are able to have with 101 resist. Balance and ice are the only two that you are able to make full-on immune based on gear. Just based on that, you can tell balance is a fairly defensive. Now its health isn't great. I mean, I've got some Catacombs gear on, and it's still only 8,500 for level 130. Which, I mean, that is one of the best, but it's not what you would consider full on. Now, I'm probably massively downgrading it by saying that, because truthfully it probably does have second best health. But, I mean, so that's what each of these schools are. Now, What school would I recommend starting off with if you don't really have experience? Well, that's kind of complicated because all of these schools have positives and negatives. I would say not Myth at all. Myth is extremely hard to work with. Do I have any Myth TCs that actually are spells? Okay, apparently not, because Celestial Calendar is too far up for me to really use it as an example. But if you actually noticed, most of those weren't actually from ones that you could learn. If they were, they weren't attacks. Myth does not get very much as far as attacks, which some people consider a positive, but in my opinion, I don't recommend starting off with Myth because it's not going to give you the experience that you want. Because the ideal starting school is one that's somewhat easy to work with and can give you enough experience to start racking up later on. Myth, in my opinion, is neither of those. So, right off the bat, despite the fact that that's a hard question, I can immediately drop it from 7 to 6 schools. So, Myth, out of the question. Now, I will say you could start off with Ice. However, if you do that, you have to be prepared to be in a team. Because you cannot start off with an Ice with little experience without being in a team. It doesn't work. Ice just isn't made to be solo. So, Ice only if you're in a team. Fire, probably not, just because of the fact that it doesn't really... You actually have to know what you're doing for fire to be much use. I mean, the primary use fire gets is PvP, because that's the only place it really feels welcome. PvE, in any situation, it doesn't really work. It's possible, but even I've never really taken a fire past level 50 just because it just starts to become bad. So, fire, probably don't want to start off with that one without much experience because you really do have to know what you're doing. Storm, contrary to it being the one that I'm doing a walkthrough with, I wouldn't really recommend either because, well, not to the extent Fire has it, you still kind of have to know what you're doing. Because while a lot of storms, once they get upwards in level 100, level 110, can end a battle first turn, they also know exactly what gear to go for, exactly what spells they're supposed to have in their deck. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. So while it's not necessarily knowing what you're doing as much as Fire, it's a lot of research as far as what works and what doesn't, which can kind of ruin the fun of starting off with it. Life would be okay to start off with, just because of it being mainly heals that will primarily keep you alive. So it's okay, just be prepared to not really have much as far as damage. But I mean, even I, on a life at one point, had like 70 damage at level 40 at one point. So it is possible to get damage on a life. So, life is actually, in my opinion, a great starting school. Now before I get to death, I'm gonna point out the elephant in the room. Balance. Now, this is a little bit this is kind of hypocritical, but I'd say do not start with balance. Because even in a group setting, balance doesn't have the greatest setup. Because while balance, like ice, is made to be in a group, balance doesn't get the positive of having insane critical block, and it doesn't have anywhere near as much health. Ice have upwards of like 9,500 health at this point. Think about that. 9.5 thousand at the point that my balance is at. The most my balance is probably going to have is almost 9,000. So balance doesn't get the health as much of a health benefit as ice. It doesn't get the critical block benefit, and it's harder to become to actually get the 101 resist than it is for ice, which means the resist isn't nearly as much of a benefit. Now it's still possible, but it's harder. So, contrary to the fact that my first wizard was balance, I don't recommend it. Because my first playthrough was rough. And I don't mean rough as in, oh yeah, pretty much anywhere where I couldn't be in a team was just mildly difficult. No. I mean, it's like trying to ride a sled uphill along sandpaper. It was difficult. It took me multiple years to finish the game on my balance. And then death. Even though, and I can see how well it works, death is actually considered the best solo school because of its drainability. And it really does work just that well. It's the easiest to solo difficult bosses with, it's the easiest to solo in general. So, death is a hard topic overall anyway. Because death in itself is controversial. I mean, I could make an entire video off of just how controversial the death school is and what all it is and how good it is, how bad it is. I could make an entire video off of the death school. The other schools would be about 2 each. So, there's a lot of controversy in the death school. Now, my own opinion, it's a little bit rough, but if you know you're likely going to be soloing and you have to choose a soloable character that's easily able to be turned to solo, death is great. Amazing option. Because if necessary, it also has this nifty little thing called sacrifice, which for 3 pips, granted, the 250 damage is a bit rough, but for 3 pips you can get pretty good heal from your own school. And if you have well enough death resist, I don't because I went for universal, but if you have well enough death resist, this may as well only do like 100, which means you could get 600 for 3 pips. That's 200 a pip. That's almost as good as Satyr. And not to mention, if you're at like 10 health and you're about to die, you can use sacrifice and you're at 700 health. So death has some, I guess you'd call it second plan spells that it can work with. So it is a pretty good school to start off with. just biggest thing I would say be careful about is there's a lot of points where it's rough. It's kind of that rocky uphill path that you're moving along, but it's not super hard to make it as if you're going up that with a Jeep. So it can be worked around. And truthfully, if you're going to be soloing, it's the one I would recommend. So there's that. But still, my first choice there would be life. So overall, I guess what I'm trying to end up actually is, I guess the end result there is if you're going to be in a team, I'd recommend starting with ice. If you're going to be solo, first pick would be life. If you want something a little bit more rough, death. Now, I'm starting to run way over time, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap this off. My own favorite school personally is probably Balance. Now, I'm a little biased on that, of course. The first wizard I ever made was Balance. It's the one I got to know over years of work before anything ever actually happened. So, it's kind of biased there, but that's my opinion. Anyhow, that's it. If you don't want to, basically, if that's all you, I just lost the ability to speak. That's about it. All the schools and what they're strong and weak at, and my recommendations of starting. Now, you don't have to follow my recommendations. I mean, they're exactly that, recommendations. But, they would be my overall opinion how you should start off if you don't have much experience. Anyhow, I'll see you all in whatever my next video is. I think I'm probably going to continue my walkthrough. I just wanted to do something a little different today. So I'll see you all in whatever my next video is, and peace.